Sonic X Shadow Generations is near perfect, one of the best Sonic games. It took everything that was good about the original and made it better, as well as expanding on what made the other Sonic games so great. When I was younger, Generations was the game I grew up playing. At the time when I was playing it, I couldn't really appreciate all the references and returning levels, but over time, as I played every Sonic game and replayed Generation dozens of times, I could start to notice and understand all of them, and it was amazing. Seeing a game that realised and celebrated the history of my favourite franchise, even with all the low points, was and is still amazing. So when a remaster of one of my favourite Sonic games, as well as just games in general, was announced with an entire new story based on my favourite character, you already know it was an instant pre-order. And it lives up to that hype. What before was me noticing references in retrospect of the original Sonic Generations is now me noticing all the references as I play and being reminded of all the memories I have with this franchise. Before I talk about Shadow Generations though, we need to talk about the Sonic Generations remaster. Oh yeah, and I quickly mentioned that all the music in this game is phenomenal. Sonic Generations is still the masterpiece it was back in 2014. A change that was brought on with the remaster in Shadow Generations is the change of the button layout. You can still use the original controls in Sonic's story and all the controls are fully customizable, but the main new control scheme, all the buttons have been changed to the Frontiers layout. Which I prefer, as with the boost on the trigger it means that it's a lot easier to light speed dash and slide. However, I will make one complaint with modern Sonic's controls, and that is that you homing attack with the same button, unlike in Shadow Story. Similar to Unleashed, the square is now a homing attack. The only reason that was a problem in Unleashed is because that was mapped to the same button as boost, but now it's not, so it would have made sense to change it to square, to allow Sonic to air dash without the risk of accidentally attacking, or vice versa. The story rewrite of the game felt kinda useless though. It doesn't really change much but dialogue, which can feel kinda weird at times, because it doesn't change the animations, it changes what they say, so sometimes they can be talking really fast.
It was great teaming up with you, or me. Maybe this will fast track you to learning some new tricks in the future. Wait, I mean, past. Ugh, time travel's a chore.
Or what they say just doesn't make sense. An example of this is with Knuckles. As classic Sonic, when saving him in the original game, he asks Sonic if he's gotten fatter, and then Sonic holds his belly and looks sad. But in the remaster, Knuckles says something else, and classic Sonic still does the same thing. So he just kind of randomly gets upset about his weight. There are a few cutscene additions which are welcome, but there are some changes that are weird. Like how Sonic no longer holds Amy back at the party, and how Knuckles doesn't get hit into the tree. But overall, none of the changes were game ruining. The stages you play through are Green Hill, Chemical Plant, and Sky Sanctuary, making up the classic era, Speed Highway, City Escape, and Seaside Hill, making up the Dreamcast era, and Crisis City, Rooftop Run, and Planet Wisp, making up the modern era. All of these levels are great apart from Planet Wisp in my opinion. An addition in these stages that comes with a remaster is that there are now 3 chows you can find in them, along with the red rings. The stages are split into 2 main acts. 2D Classic Sonic and 3D Boost Sonic. This game's Classic Sonic is very fun. I see it get a lot of slack, but I mainly contribute that towards bitterness towards Forces, because I honestly find this game Classic Sonic to be very fun. While yes, it's not an accurate translation of the Genesis games, it's still very fun and keeps all the same design principles. High path is faster, lower path is slower and has more hazards. In some stages I even prefer the classic act, like City Escape for example. I'm honestly not a huge fan of the quick step section at the end of Act 2, as it feels like it drags on a bit, but apart from that Act 2 is still great. Act 1 also probably has the best remix of Escape from the City. The backgrounds are all extremely well designed and feel alive as well. An example of this is at the start of Green Hill. You start zoomed in at the same framing as the original, so you may think that the background will just be a 3D version of what it was in the first game. But walking forwards it zooms out to show a sprawling forest. It helps make the levels feel like actual locations other than just blocks for Sonic to run on. The spin dash is far more powerful than in the Genesis games, and sends you flying, leading to some fat shortcuts. New to the remaster is the drop dash returning from Mania. I didn't use it too much though because the levels weren't really designed with it in mind, but it's still a fun addition. The main attraction of Sonic Generations though is the modern gameplay, and it still holds up amazingly. The levels are fantastically designed with multiple paths and ways of shortening runtime. Similar to the classic gameplay, the backgrounds and scenery are beautiful, and the way they blend into and form shortcuts is really cool. Take the start of Chemical Plant for example. You run down a path, and to your left and right are 2 others that to the untrained eye could just be seen as scenery. But by jumping on one, you could either get an entirely new path or a shortcut that leads to a life. Granted, the extra life is kind of irrelevant since in the remaster they got rid of them. I think the change to infinite lives was for the better though. The start of Speed Highway is another great showcase of what I just said, with how you can grab onto a helicopter at the start of the level. In classic City Escape, the truck comes in and out of the background destroying bits of the level. Seaside Hill is a great example of the alternate paths the game has, with how even at the very start you can choose to go in 3 directions. And throughout the stage you can do things like choose to ride on a cart or jump on turtles. I'm still terrified of that metal fish in the water if you run too far out of bounds. The main complaint I see people have with the modern Boost Sonic gameplay is the 2D sections. While yes, I'm not a huge fan of them, they're still done very well, and do benefit the levels more than damage them. Apart from Planet Wisp, which is a shame because the level starts off so strong with some great 3D platforming and a really nice environment. But by the end you're playing through some pretty tedious and not very enjoyable long 2D section. The 2D sections are needed in the Sonic story though, due to how he controls at lower speeds. It can be kinda hard to platform in 3D due to how he controls kinda stiffly when you're trying to move slow. However, the Shadow story fixes both of these problems by giving us the best of both worlds, fully 3D levels and fast-paced 2D boost levels. Sonic also has the drop dash in 3D as well, but I rarely used it. As I said previously, the story isn't a huge part of the game due to it being an anniversary celebration, so it's mainly used to provide context for the game. Sonic is a birthday party and gets interrupted by the Time Eater, who causes Sonic and his past self, Classic Sonic, to be put in the same place, White Space, where they have to play through levels from their history to reach the Time Eater and beat it. Spoilers, it's just Eggman and Eggman. You select levels from White Space, a 2D hub, where you can do other stuff like go into challenge levels in the collection room, where you can view things like artwork and music you collect from getting red rings and completing challenge levels. There are also bosses you have to fight to get the Chaos Emeralds. Metal Sonic, the Death Egg Robot, Shadow, Perfect Chaos, Silver, the Egg Dragon and the Time Eater. All of these but the Time Eater are pretty good. Perfect Chaos being my favourite with how it's basically its own mini level, with you having to run through a flooded city to get to him. And the worst is obviously the Time Eater. I still don't even know what you're supposed to do in the fight, but it's somehow stupidly easy. They even managed to save the catastrophe that was a Silver boss fight in 06, by making it into a chase through Crisis City where you have to do things like homing attack onto cars he's holding with his telekinesis. So they always thought of as a missed opportunity for Sonic Generations was DLC. Me and many other fans would have happily bought new levels from the past games. They could have been sold in packs of 3 and gone over games that either weren't covered or just new levels from already represented ones. With the remaster there's even more possibilities for DLC now Shadow Generations is in it. Like imagine if we get levels from the storybook games or Riders. I'm just saying, this game has been very well received and Sega would just be sleeping on money if they didn't. The last thing I want to mention about Sonic Generations is the UI. I love all of the colourful shapes and it makes even the simplest things feel so much more exciting. Shadow Generation starts off incredibly strong on Space Colony Arc, where Shadow goes to investigate an energy reading he had there. In there we play a phenomenal level where we not only play through Space Colony, but also get transported to Radical Highway inspections of it by Black Doom, who's trying to get Shadow to come back on his side and work for him. This gives us a reason why Shadow wasn't at Sonic's birthday. After the level, Shadow gets transported to White Space, similar to how Sonic did, by the Time Eater. There we play through levels of past Sonic games that Shadow was in, as well as levels from new Sonic games, in order to reach Black Doom and beat him. Each stage is split into 2 acts like the main game, but instead of having a classic Shadow, we have the boost gameplay in 2D. A change that I at first thought I wouldn't like, but in execution the 2D acts are very fun. The 3D levels are also fully 3D unlike Sonic Generations, which I prefer a lot. While I'm not as against the 2D and 3D stages as others, with the new controls, the 2D sections would have been completely unnecessary, as proper 3D platforming is easier now. The levels are longer than what we had in Generations also. The stages we have are Space Colony from Sonic Adventure 2, Rail Canyon from Heroes, Kingdom Valley from 06, Sunset Heights from Forces, Chaos Island from Frontiers, and Radical Highway from Adventure 2. I love all of these levels apart from maybe Chaos Island Act 1. Kingdom Valley is probably my favourite with how open it is. There's so many different routes and ways of approaching these levels, and it adds so much to replay value. Contributing to the replay value and possible routes are the Chaos and Doom powers. Shadow starts off with Chaos Control, which alone has so much possibilities for new paths and methods of approaching these levels. Being able to freeze time means you can do things like freeze rockets to walk on them, or freeze enemies to get to higher routes, as well as just freezing the clock to get a faster time. After each stage you unlock a new Doom power, and all these look super cool. Doom Spears, which can be used to activate switches or shoot at enemies. Doom Blast, which is my favourite to use as it's incredibly fun, because you can access new areas by launching enemies in the air, then in a direction and teleporting to where they land. Doom Surf, which allows you to surf on water, and Doom Morph, which I'm not a huge fan of, but it's only really a negative for me in one level, which is Chaos Island Act 1. The ability lets you go on the purple surfaces and swim off these purple balls. And finally, you get the Doom Wings, which look awesome. These are my favourite visually and allow Shadow to fly when boosting in the air. These all make Shadow stand out from Sonic's gameplay. Shadow can't lightspeed dash though, unlike Sonic, however he can double jump. Shadow alone controls great though. A problem I had with the original Generations and many others did is that Sonic control kinda stiffly when at slow speeds, but Shadow fixes that problem. I always felt in control of Shadow no matter what speed I was at, and all the animations are very clean. Shadow carries so much style that helps him stand out as his own. The only problem I have with Shadow is that the air boost could have been longer as there's no air dash. In the original generations, you could homing attack while not locked onto something and do a short dash forward, which helped to line jumps and stuff like that. But Shadow could only homing attack on boost. Not a huge problem though. These levels are all incredibly cinematic as well. They take the spectacle of the boost games and crank it up to 1000. Most of the levels have these scenes where Shadow just does some downright just cool stuff. I can't stress how phenomenal the design of most of these levels are. As an example, you could get 8 people to play Kingdom Valley, and they'll all have a different experience of the way they played it. As I said previously, Kingdom Valley is my favourite from Shadow Generations and Sonic Generations as a whole. The way you can kick the Doom enemies into the air and boot them through windows to teleport to new locations makes for such great possibilities for time shortening, especially when combined with Chaos Control. The level also makes great use of the Doom Surf. Each stage feels unique, not only because you unlock a new Doom ability before them, but also because they have their own unique gimmicks and set pieces, like how in Space Colony you get transported to Radical Highway. Same with Rail Canyon, as well as obviously having the rail so you can change the direction of the switches. Sega even managed to make a good Forces level. It's actually one of my favourites from the game. Like, look at Shadow dodge these massive robots. Unlike Sonic's White Space, which is basically just a glorified menu, Shadow gets a Frontier style hub world, where you can explore to open crates you can get collectibles like music and art out of, or do bonus stages. In the main stages and bonus levels, you get tokens that take the place of red rings. They can be used to unlock the crates to get the collectibles. I actually enjoyed all the bonus levels as well. You can still get the collectibles from Bells like in Generations though. I honestly wasn't a huge fan of Frontiers, but Shadow's White Space feels like a more compact and skillfully built version of the open zones. Once you finish all the bonus levels and main stages of an area, you restore the colour to it, and it's really cool and satisfying seeing a little area themed after a stage. The UI is also really clean. It keeps the varied shapes from Sonic Generations, but replaces the colours for a sleek black and red. While the story in Sonic Generations was mostly absent, the story in Shadow Generations is actually really good. You get to know more about the history of Gerald Robotnik with a journal you get for pre-ordering the physical version of the game, which is really cool. And we also learn that Gerald built Shadow with the help of Black Doom, which is why Shadow can learn the Doom powers. Seeing Shadow interact with Maria is also really heartwarming, with how she helps keep him on track and not fall under Black Doom's control. The cutscene where he fights Sonic is also really well animated. In it we learn that Sonic actually took a fake Chaos Emerald that Shadow switches out at the end of the game. This is just a reason for Shadow to be able to keep using Chaos Control in his story though. The bosses are also hype as hell. We fight the Bio Lizard, Metal Overlord and Mephiles. While Mephiles is my favourite of the villains, Metal Overlord is my favourite of the 3 fights. What I'm made of just made the fight so hype. The final boss was amazing as well. After dashing through the crumbling Radical Highway we fight Black Doom. The fight makes use of all the Doom powers, and when all hell Shadow played, I levitated man. Like I said at the start of the video, this franchise means a lot to me, and after playing through the game and being reminded of all the memories I have with it, such an amazing final fight with my favourite character and an amazing song hits so hard. And the ending in the game really hit as well. Shadow got to see Maria, who is fading away due to him defeating Black Doom and time restoring. He says it will use Chaos Control to freeze time, but she says it will be for the best if they go back to the way time was. She tells him that she'll know she'll see him again.
And if fate draws us apart, I will always be in your heart.
Maria. Wait.
The last thing we see is Shadow running past Rouge, who's taken the real Chaos Emerald to Sonic for him to fight the Time Eater at the end of the game, as a tear flies by him onto her face. I won't lie, there was a little something in my eye after this. For those who don't know, Shadow was made to protect Maria and help her get better, but she was killed by Gun and Satan before she died, so to see him have to let her go again really hit. And that was Sonic X Shadow Generations, a remaster of a game I love with a story addition for a character I also love. I know I've said it multiple times already, but this series really does mean a lot to me. And this game let me reminisce on all the memories I have of it. I remember my first time playing Adventure 2. I remember watching Come On Manny, I think that's how you say it, play 06 and thinking it looked cool as hell. Not knowing how to get the game because it was just titled Sonic the Hedgehog. I remember these custom shirts used to have my name on and some Sonic character on it. I remember playing on my PS3 and forcing my dad to watch me beat the Egg Dragon that I had to try ages to do. As goofy as it sounds, I generally don't think I'd be the same person I am today about this franchise. Thank you Sega for making this game, and thank you for watching. For now, this is goodbye, and hopefully you stick around to subscribe.